Right, good evening everybody, our members and visitors. Welcome to the Development Committee, the 11th of September 2018. Significant delayed from when it should be in August. Our apologies for that. Unfortunately, the Council had some fairly catastrophic IT issues, which meant that the proper preparation couldn't be done, and as all of our planning applications are treated with the utmost seriousness, we needed to cancel the meeting and to delay things until we were happy that all the information had been properly gathered. I'll start with our emergency evacuation procedure, which is that, should we be required to evacuate the building, would you please leave the building via the nearest available exit to the chamber. Our assembly point will be in the public car park at the side of the Civic Suite. Please do not delay your evacuation to collect any belongings, and please do not return into the building until given permission to do so by council staff. Please also note that the meeting will be recorded, and if you have a phone, please silent it or turn it off. Thank you. Our apologies have been received from Councillor Iano, who's been substituted by Councillor FD, and our non-members attending, Councillor Stanley, Gooding, Pavlin, Sperring, Rowe and Merrick. Thank you. Eventually got there. Okay, minutes of the meeting held on the 19th. Sorry? Yeah, I said that one. Yeah. Minutes of the meeting held on the 19th of July 2018. Are you happy for me to sign those as a correct and accurate record of that meeting? Great. Thank you. Declarations of interest. Councillor Milne.
A member of Rayleigh Town Council, and on one of the issues with Goldsmith Avenue, the Town Council wrote a letter.
Right.
Which I'm aware of, but it does not influence in any way.
Okay. Councillor Merrick.
Chairman, I have a non-pecuniary interest in item 7 by virtue of the road in which I reside potentially being affected by the proposals for construction of traffic. For this reason, I will withdraw from the meeting before members commence their meeting.
Okay, thank you. We'll move then straight on to our items. I believe most of our visitors tonight are here for item 8, so we'll take that one first. Just a quick explanation of the way it works. The officers will give their independent report first of all. There'll then be the opportunity for the two people that have already registered to have their say for a maximum of 5 minutes. Then our non-members will get the opportunity to make a speech if they so wish. Then it'll be a debate open to members who will discuss the item prior to ultimately taking a vote. You may hear some things that you agree with, you may hear some things that you disagree with. Unfortunately, you're not able to take part in the meeting by contribution, and it is important that all members are able to hear everything that is said clearly. So if there's something said that you particularly agree with or disagree, please keep as tight a cap on the noise as possible. So, Mr. Stranks, start us off then, please.
Thank you, Chairman. This application is to a site on the south side of Goldsmith Drive, which makes a junction here with Holbridge Road. You'll see the Rayleigh Club golf course, and it's an area of plotland that has mixed uses. You'll see a scattering of residential dwellings and some isolated businesses, but also vacant, clear plots. The site is within the Metropolitan Green Belt allocation. It's also within Flood Zone 1, which is the least risk of flooding zone where development would normally be directed. The site, as you can see on there, was formerly open grassland with some minor hedging up to the sides and a more substantial hedge at the back. Before we press on, I would firstly correct the report at paragraph 7, which members will see from the detail on the image and plans that will follow, that number 1 and 2 Goldsmith Drive, located here, are actually detached dwellings and not semi-detached. If we can jump to the location plan, please. The application site is edged in red, as you'll see here. Here's the sort of hedge to the Lubbards area at the back, Goldsmith Drive along the top, and 1 and 2 Goldsmith Drive located up here. You'll see that the application was revised. There's a slightly different plan in the back of your agenda, which includes sort of like a C-shaped site. Following representations made by the people who own this land, the applicant revised the site to their ownership, and you'll see it widens at the rear there. If we can jump to the detailed layout, please, thank you. The application involves the creation of an access that comes down into the site, into this turning area at the top. There's a fence there and a row of hedging and a sort of a turning head to at the beginning of the site. And you'll see that an area at the back here provides 2 static caravans and 2 touring caravans and 1 day room. If we can jump to just briefly the day room, it's a simple building, about 9 metres wide, 4.6 wide and 4 metres in height overall with a pitched roof. And you'll see it provides an area with a toilet and a utility room. Now that is pretty standard for traveller sites. If we can jump back to the layout again, please. You normally find one pitch, in planning technical terms, comprises a static, like a more permanent residential base, and then ability for the touring caravans to be parked, and then a day room. That's pretty standard provision. In this case, the day room would be shared by both plots. It's not unusual sometimes to find a day room on each plot. The application you'll see was made in late 2017, but more recently in July this year, whilst the application remains still outstanding, the applicant commenced work and has so far provided a more substantial area. You'll see from the officer's report that the area shown on the plans equates to something like 217 square metres, but this is a much larger area now that's been surfaced, and that is separately subject to enforcement notice. The fence line, not the hedging, has also been constructed. Members will also see from the site history on paragraph 15 to the report that an application for a polytunnel, which is on this side of a small nursery, that does tend to get picked up in the site histories that we report to. There's a technical reason for that. I think the site overlapped in the way it was plotted. But to make clear for members, that polytunnel application is for the site next door. It's not for this site. Now, the development proposed, as you can see in the green belt, is inappropriate development. Members are probably pretty clear with that. It was an open, undeveloped site, and this any development really on there would be inappropriate, except for agriculture perhaps. And you'll see that officers make that point in the report. However, members will be aware that there's been 2 similar applications in the vicinity of the site. One at the former pumping station in Watery Lane, which was slightly different in that it constituted previously developed land. That is a bit like, say, Bulwood Hall, which is a good example, a development that was in the green belt, but that became redundant and has been given a new permission for redevelopment. So the one in Watery Lane was also for a 2-pitch traveller site. That was on previously developed land, and officers on that one recommended to you to refuse, and the application was refused. And there was another application, if we can just jump back to the location plan if you can, Claire, was on here. Now, although I think the owner owns all of that site, which is 20 metres or so away from the site, the actual distance between this site and this corner is about 100, 105 metres. That's why that says it that way on the report. Now, significantly, both these decisions were appealed by the applicants. Officers recommended both to be refused in light of the government policy of 2015. And in the Watery Lane case, the appeal was allowed. It was granted as a permanent gypsy site, conditional to gypsies, not personal to the persons who were applying, but it's a site that can be reoccupied by different families. And in the case of the one on Holbridge Road, that was made personal to the applicant and his dependents who were applying. Now, in those cases, the inspectors acknowledged that it was inappropriate development in the green belt. They acknowledged the added harm about the urbanisation, which was the council's defence, but they were highly critical that the council hadn't met its allocation, its provision, which now amounts to some 19 pitches prior to 2033. and the scenario that future gypsy site provision would be likely to be met from what is currently greenbelt in future allocations. Now, perhaps because the Watery Lane site was previously developed land, the inspector made that permission permanent. In the Woodville site that you see here, the inspector anticipated that there would be future releases coming forward in your local plan emerging by 2020. There would need to be then a time to obtain permission and then build that site out wherever that may be. So he granted permission for a 5-year temporary permission for this one here. And that is what largely framed the recommendation that's before you tonight. We've rehearsed the policy issues, but we've been tried and tested on 2 recent occasions. The appeal in Watery Lane was given in November, and the appeal on Holbridge Road, the decision was in February this year, which is both very current and in the context of the current policy. So on the addendum, members will see that there are some further representations from third parties, which I won't go through because members have obviously had a chance to read that. But what you haven't seen, we've had a letter since the addendum was published from a resident of 51 The Drive, Holbridge, and I'll just read it. It's not a long letter. It says, "I am the owner of 6 plots of greenbelt on the junction of Maple Avenue, Goldsmith Drive, and have been so for the last 27 years. I wish to object to the above planning application on the grounds listed below, which is greenbelt, illegal occupation of the land. Why is this person allowed to do so when everyone else has had to comply with the restrictions on greenbelt? The location plan is submitted is incorrect. No mains water down Goldsmith Drive. Any planning has to comply with the structure being in keeping with the surrounding buildings. A caravan mobile home does not. I urge you and the planning committee to dismiss this application on the above grounds, as this will have a detrimental effect to anyone living down the road or people that own greenbelt plots there." The recommendation, Chairman, is approval subject to the conditions that you see set out in the report.
Thank you. Mr Stranks mentioned the addendum. Just one final check. Everyone's seen the addendum, got access to the addendum? Yeah. Okay, our first speaker is Councillor Mercer from Reading Town Council. Up to 5 minutes. I'll let you know when you've got a minute to go.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, members. This is another retrospective application to create a traveller site in the Greenbelt in the Rochford district. Government policy states that if applications are made after the development has been started, then this should count against the application, and it is surprising that the officer is excusing the applicant's total disregard of planning law. Government policy states that traveller sites are inappropriate development for the Greenbelt. It also states that traveller sites in the Greenbelt should only be advanced through the local plan and not as a result of the planning application. Development in the Greenbelt should only be permitted under exceptional circumstances, and these have not been demonstrated in this case. The officer has stated that this represents harmful encroachment onto the Greenbelt and is contrary to policy GB1 and the National Planning Policy Framework. There are other reasons why development in the Greenbelt should not be permitted, and local residents have raised most of these: destruction of hedgerow, damage to wildlife and Greenbelt, discharges into watercourses of treated or untreated effluent, density of local traveller sites, accessibility to the site, visual impact of the development, lack of water mains, damage to local biodiversity and access for emergency vehicles. Despite these numerous different and valid objections, the officer has recommended the granting of a temporary consent of 5 years. This is effectively permanent, particularly when travellers' children become registered at local schools. Paragraph 41 of the report states that refusal would be detrimental to the interests of the child, but government policy states that personal circumstances and unmet need are unlikely to clearly outweigh harm to the Greenbelt and any other harm, so that to establish very special circumstances of which there are none. Who will ensure that the families and caravans are removed and the ground is returned to its original condition in 2023? RDC's enforcement team are already overstretched. The officer has recommended this consent in the face of numerous valid objections because RDC has not met the current requirement to provide a deliverable forward supply of traveller pitches in the district. But again, policy states quite clearly that the Greenbelt is exempt from this provision. So there would appear to be no real reason for the officer to support this consent other than the belief that RDC will lose on appeal. This is predetermination. The officers must judge all cases on their merits, on how they are guided by government policy and the local plan, and on the comments and objections made by all consultees, and not what they guess a planning inspector might decide. The purpose of a planning authority is to plan development for all types in accordance with the local plan and government policies, particularly for traveller sites, not simply to approve applications such as this on an ad hoc basis for greenbelt land where travellers choose to live. Local residents must be listened to and not ignored by officers. Listing their objections and then ignoring them is unacceptable. It is entirely reasonable for these residents to expect due regard for all material planning objections, to fully and fairly apply government policy to ensure that recommendations are in keeping with the letter and the spirit of the local plan, to avoid injustice to any parties when determining planning applications. RDC officers have abdicated their responsibility in meeting these reasonable expectations, and it's therefore only right the members reject this recommendation, and I urge you to do so. Members should be aware that other similar applications have recently been made on greenbelt land in Rochford District, and many more applications may be expected due to RDC's failure to provide allocated traveller pitches. This failure should be addressed now. It cannot wait until the next local plan. The requirement for sites needs to be met by RDC in areas that are sustainable, are close to utilities and do not contradict planning law or are detrimental to existing residents, which this application appears to be. The government policy states that there should be true regard to protect local amenity and the local environment, and that peaceful and integrated coexistence with the local community should be promoted. This site is being enclosed with a 1.8 metre high fence, isolating it from the surrounding community. Hard standing has already been laid, a cesspit installed, and the local residents object to it. I urge members to refuse this application.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now have Mrs Payne.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm speaking to object on behalf of myself and all other local residents. This is in addition to all the matters raised in objection letters and the addendum. What I'm about to say can be substantiated, and I hope a few photos will be shown. One of the planning requirements is set out by Her Majesty's Government that allow travellers to receive special planning concession is that the traveller must be working. If not, they are dealt with under planning as the settled community. Planners need to know which one of the two criteria a traveller falls into. The only way to prove a traveller is working is for them to produce documentation to prove their income via HMRC accounts or a P60. For an applicant to be able to just say he is working is an abuse of process. The planning officers appear to be of the opinion that travellers do not have to prove this. I would ask the planning officers, where does it say they do not have to prove it? Firstly, I draw your attention to some of the errors that were found in the officers' report, which the officers have seen fit to acknowledge tonight since their 5th of September report, but I'm going to carry on as my speech is written. Item 1. The officer report states hard standing at the rear of the site to be approximately 217 square metres, but approximately 1,080 square metres of greenbelt field has actually been covered in hard standing. There is a further approximately 360 square metres of hard standing forming a road on the site. The word approximate cannot be used as a defence for this error. 2. The officer report states opposite the application site is a semi-detached pair of dwellings. In fact, there are 2 4-bed detached houses. 3. The officer's report states that to the west of the site is a polytunnel that appears to be in a state of disuse. In fact, this field is a thriving, active business with the polytunnel in full use. The planning officers appear to be dismissing the immediate area around the application site, whilst completely ignoring and misrepresenting there is nothing of note, including an obvious nursery business. 4. The location plans enclosed with the latest officer's report still shows land not owned by the applicant. The true owner of the land made planning officers aware of this land grab and that the original submitted plans were inaccurate. The applicant has since submitted a revised location plan showing the true boundaries. Why does the current officer's report still contain the wrong location plan? 5. The officer's report states the application is approximately 105 metres from another traveller site. In fact, boundary to boundary is 20 metres apart. 6. Once again, the nursery has been totally ignored and the polytunnel approval has been given to the application site. Why is this? Is it because the site has had many planning applications refused, even on appeal? 7. Talking of previous applications, 2 were refused by officers, one reason being there was excessive amounts of hard standing. The present application has a similar amount, yet the officers now approve this. It's still Greenbelt. What's changed? 8. The Development Committee had been made aware that Mark Francois MP had written to Sean Scrutton lodging a formal objection to this application. He had specifically asked his objection be noted in the report that would go to the Development Committee. It was not. A neighbour contacted Mr Francois informing him of this omission, which led Mr Francois to resend his letter to Mr Scrutton expressing his disappointment it had not been included. I understand the Development Committee have now received a copy of this letter and comments have been noted in tonight's addendum. Mr Francois' letter, along with other objection letters, have not been logged on the planning portal. Why? Surely it is everyone's democratic right to be heard and acknowledged. Secondly, at 7 a.m. Saturday, 14th July, Mr O'Brien and his family set up an illegal camp on the application site. 1. Applicant and family have been harassing neighbours for an illegal water connection. All have rightly refused. 2. Applicant and son visited Fairways Garden Centre to use the toilets. They totally abused the situation and the son was recorded on CCTV going into the female toilet when a lady was in a cubicle next door, wrecking the toilet by pulling the lid off the pan and leaving excrement everywhere.
Just a minute to go.
3. Soon after this, they were seen acting suspiciously before stealthily entering 2 properties at night, digging and burying pipe to connect an illegal water supply, which has now been terminated. The police were called to investigate. Applicant's son came to my home and also other neighbours with a water board official who asked if Mr O'Brien could connect into our private supply with a water meter. We would receive the water bills but would have to ask the travellers ourselves to pay for their portion. Essex and Suckerfoot Water have since informed us this proposal is illegal. They had no one working in our area that day and in fact they would not call on houses for this reason. We have no idea who was impersonating a water board official, but as pensioners this is very disconcerting and intimidating behaviour. Obviously all this is having a terrible effect on local residents and we're very worried about the future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. This item was referred by Councillor Stanley. I'm presuming you'd like to lead us.
I'd like to leave my comments to the end, if I may.
No.
Can
As
I
a
not?
visiting member, you're only able to speak before the members.
Yeah, I mean before at the end of the non-committee members.
Okay, do any other... Councillor Rowe.
Thank you, Chairman. Can we be sure that we have all the information in front of us now? I had Mr Gandy at Mark Francois' surgery on Saturday morning, clearly stating that this letter hadn't been forwarded to hadn't been put in our documentation tonight, and we received it yesterday. Are there any other documents that are missing, any other letters that have gone into the officers that haven't been presented to us? Because I find that quite shambolic. 6th of August that letter was dated, and we've only heard of it from yesterday. Thank you.
I think I'll just say on applications, there's often lots of representations. As members, we don't receive a copy of every representation. It goes to the officers for their independent research and examination, and they will often sum up within their report the nature of the responses that have been made. But I can, if you'd like to.
Chairman, the reason for the postponement for such a long while was to hopefully capture the letters that we thought were missing while we had the IT breakdown. So there's been needed to get past that and then allow time for whatever letters we could retrieve or find to be presented to you. So that's why there's several on the addendum that you see tonight. That's because they've been submitted. It may be 4 or 5 weeks ago perhaps, but we as best we can establish, we think we've caught all those that have been submitted.
Yeah, carry on.
Thank you. As I said, that letter was dated the 6th of August. We didn't have IT problems then. We definitely didn't. And Mark Francois specifically said he wanted that letter in this report. So I'm very surprised that it's come the day before the meeting.
Any other of our visiting members wish to speak? Councillor Stanley then.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, may I say that from the previous speakers on this issue, that this is a green belt we are dealing with. The site had its own ecological area before work was undertaken, and yet we have not had a report on it before occupation, which should have been in this report from the officers, together with a report on the cesspit that has been installed without permission. The plot did have a hedgerow and watercourse, which has not been stated, which could have been used if the cesspit, which could be used if the cesspit overflows, which I believe should not be used for that purpose. Furthermore, the size of the plot is 41 metres by 106 metres. There is a parcel of land owned by another resident, and I see up there that this has been now altered to correspond with what the other occupier is occupying. Taking into account this amount and removing from that figure would leave 3,000 square metres, of which the best part is laid to planings and hardcore. The mobile homes would be approximately 9 metres each and would take up half the width of the site, which this has not been correctly put on the site plan, as you can see above. I have a question to ask about the day room, whether this is to be a fixed dwelling or a mobile dwelling, which could be removed in that 5-year period, at the end of the 5-year period, should that have to be. And as we know, it's not really designed on green belt as a fixed building. Is the occupier a Romany gypsy or a traveller? We know that the parcel of land on the which the officer referred to, he is a true gypsy, without any question. It is without doubt the whole exercise will be visibly intrusive and detrimental to the relatively open and underdeveloped plot of land character of the green belt. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Okay. So that now concludes the part where our visiting members are able to take part. So members, Councillor Steptoe, please.
Thank you, Thank you, Chairman. I'd like just some bits of clarification, please, on what we've been presented. No particular order here. On the drawing that's on the screen there, where the day room is, there's something just a little bit to the north of that. I can't quite make out what it is. Is it a circle? What's that?
Yeah.
That's the cesspit, right?
Cesspit.
Okay. Thank you. That's what I wanted to clarify. What reasons has the applicant given? Special reasons has the applicant given that would negate the green belt status? With regards to the water supply, they've obviously created a water supply. I'm curious to know how are the other properties supplied within the road there? Are they on artesian wells, or how is that supplied? You mentioned in the earlier presentation, you referred to the site as plot land. Now, I'm sort of aware of what plot lands were, but in planning terms, what significance does that have within this scenario? And the question I was going to ask, which Councillor Stanley has already said, is with regards to the day room, is that a fixed brick-built building? Is it a temporary building? Is it on a slab? What is the design characteristics of that particular building? It doesn't show any footings on the drawing there, so I'm assuming that that's just some form of temporary building.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
Councillor Hookway.
Thank you, Chairman. Firstly, question of the officers in relation to how we view this overall application. In the addendum, some of the information that was provided by some of the people who've written into the officers, there's a question over as to whether, under the current government's recent alteration and definition in relation to as individuals are defined as travellers. There was a question as to whether the person who was putting this forward actually qualifies under that recent alteration as a traveller. On that basis, if the individual doesn't meet the criteria as a traveller, then the officer's argument about this application would fall on its feet. So has there been anything to sort of define the individual as a traveller and as current legislation?
Is there anything else you want to say? Because I want to gather the questions together.
The other thing is that also the officer made indication as to recent planning history in relation to what's happened on other sites relating to inspectors but there is also in some of the information, the addendum, where there was a successful appeal or an unsuccessful appeal because objectors were able to put argument forward which the inspector agreed with, which would go contrary to what the officers had stated as to and that would be an argument to say that that would go against what the sort of like the current history, because it would show a situation that happened to the opposite of what the officer said. But also, I find it concerning that it was a decision that was made by the Development Committee against officer approval. But yet, when the matter went to appeal, there was no planning department involvement in that appeal, and the decision was made on the basis of other evidence provided by other individuals. So it would seem that we're not getting a full picture of recent history in relation to decisions made by inspectors.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got a number of questions. First of all, there's a discrepancy at paras 6 and 41. At paragraph 6, it says that the proposed occupants will be the applicant, his wife and their 2 children. Additional proposed occupants are the applicant's son and his wife. But at paragraph 41, the agent for the applicant has stated that the applicant wants to ensure that his son's children have proper access to education. If they're not born, then the 5 years doesn't really apply for education. So that's the first point. The second point is that it was mentioned that an enforcement notice was placed on the applicant. Is building work still continuing in spite of the enforcement notice? Because that might lead you to think about how they might act in the future. Going on to the Holbridge Road site, I'd like to know, did construction work start there before the appeal decision was given, or was it after the appeal decision? A question.
I think just
Sorry,
sort
yeah.
of stop you there. Future actions of someone can't be a part of a planning decision that we make, and through the planning training that we've all had, we know that people can and do sometimes start on a development without planning application, without planning permission, but that's done at risk, and it shouldn't be a determining factor in our decision tonight.
Okay.
So to make that point.
Okay. I note in the officer's report that not just in Rochford but other parts of the country that there's been this temporary 5-year period for occupancy. Have any of those periods ended anywhere, do we know? And what was the outcome of that? And then the final one is about the access to water. And my understanding is, from a child welfare point of view, that access to fresh water is actually a very important consideration. Thank you.
Okay. It's about time we summed up some of these questions then, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Dealing with them in reverse. the access to water isn't primarily a planning reason. Sorry, Chairman. The access to water isn't primarily a planning reason. Water can be brought on in containers. Applicants can pay to have a connection made. In the case of the Watery Lane site, there was, I believe, water or at least toilet facilities on the site for the workers on the pumping station, but the applicant on that site, once he got his permission, he negotiated with the adjoining farmer to pipe the water across the adjoining field, etc. The temporary 5 years, there's only one that I can think of that had a long history in New Park Road. That's in Hockley off the Lower Road area. And that went back to, I think, about 2004 when that first started. There was a series of temporary permissions and there was a change in ownership. And I struggle with the detail with that, even though I dealt with all those applications, but I think an inspector made it personal to the applicant for the last time period because there was no success in sites coming forward. So I think after several years of temporary permissions, including 2 different families occupying the site, I think that now runs on a personal permanent permission. The long-term education point raised, I don't know which one, but the applicant is basically proposing a static for himself and then his son, but he's anticipating that his son will also have children, which I take the point about the 5 years, but that's the approach that the inspector took, that ahead of a future allocation that might find a site, a temporary permission was justified. Members, no doubt, will take a view on that. Now, the question raised about the appeal, the council actually officers did provide a defence. I've read that the inspector said that no statement was made, but I've looked on the file and we did send one. What we did, as often advised by the inspectorate, when we meet them occasionally in training sessions, they make the point there is no need for endless duplication, and because the report on that application was quite full, the history, the site descriptions, etc., all what was required was that the reasons that members took be articulated. So we wrote the planning inspector a letter explaining members' findings on the night. So we did give a defence, but it wasn't the traditional defence that officers might provide in full in terms of a document size, where we perhaps recommend refusal and it's all full of all the evidence that we've relied on. As it was a member decision, obviously the only evidence we've got in an appeal is what members say on the night. So that translated into 3 paragraphs or so in a letter. Now, in terms of the definition, we've approached the applicant on the basis of the question that was asked of us a while ago about providing work. The agent told us over the phone that the applicant travels and leaflet drops, and he did say he would try and source us some of those leaflets, but that hasn't happened. We haven't heard anything from him on that since. Now, that is the same question that was asked in the other 2 appeals. I was present at both of those, the Watery Lane and the Holbridge Road appeal, whereby the inspector, like we did, they just asked the applicant to confirm if they was a traveller. They didn't ask for documentary evidence and then proceeded to their decision. Members can take their own view on that. In terms of the playroom being fixed, the day room being fixed, there isn't a lot of detail, as members saw. We know its size and its shape and its appearance. It could be of a timber construction. We don't know the details. I believe if members are minded to approve it, there's a condition that asks for the details to be submitted. Timber structures are more easily removed than, say, brick-built ones. But as I said in the presentation, day rooms are a traditional feature of gypsy pitches because their culture requires them to do the sort of laundry and ablutions in a separate building outside the sort of family home. So if you see a designed gypsy site, traveller site pitch, you always see a static, a tourer and a day room. I think...
Plot land definition.
Oh yes, plot land. that really, whilst as members of this district we're probably familiar and comfortable with plot land, I do find that inspectors struggle with it, particularly as traditionally they're normally from outside the area. And the plotland phenomenon is a historical legacy of our landscape, where you get, as a result of agricultural depression and the advent of the railway, you got sale to the railways because the railway bought land at above market price in a recessionary period, and then divided the areas up into irregular plots and unmade roadways, and then sold them all off before the First World War on big champagne parties. So you get this sporadic development after the impact of the two World Wars, where some plots were left vacant and overgrown, other people had holiday retreats. Then in the longer term, and more up to date, people have made those into dwellings and homes. So it's a term that describes something common to South Essex and also South London areas outside of London, generally influenced by railway, where it's not unusual to find a substantial house next to an overgrown scrub plot, or perhaps then a horse grazing in the next paddock, and then somebody running a small business, a few hundred yards further on. It's a mix of sporadic development, which I hope made clear, unlike the more anticipated view you get on approach to other towns across the country, where you run through farmland or moorland or something and you come to an edge of the settlement. The plot land in this area tends to be on the edges of our built-up settlements. In terms of very special circumstances, the applicant has relied on really the lack of supply and the need for accommodation and lack of sites. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Cannell.
Just before adding new ones, I know there's a lot of questions there. I don't think we got clarity on the children. We mentioned the son who might move into the piece next door. Is there any additional children had by the applicant? Because I think the discrepancy was around the education of the children. And
carry on making your points, and we'll.
And then the Holbridge Road site that was shown to the right of this. I believe there was a question around whether this applicant moved in prior to, or developed on the site, sorry, and occupied it before receiving permission.
Chairman, on the Holbridge Road site, the applicant awaited the decision, and then when he got his appeal in his favour, he then began the process of implementing the decision. It's partially implementing on the site as we speak. The information I have with regards to the applicant for this site is only what's in paragraph 6, where he says the occupants of the site would be the applicant, his wife and their 2 children. And then in the other static that you see, there would be the applicant's son and his wife. Now, I think the applicant is anticipating that the applicant's son, his older son, would subsequently have children. That's the best I can offer members with the numbers of children that would be on the site.
Carry on.
I'd prepared some things to say, however, a lot of it's been said, so I'll just pick up on the pieces where we may have disagreements. I believe that moving in and developing essentially is intentional unauthorised development has been a material consideration since 2015, therefore I believe it is worth taking into consideration. And as well as the welfare of the children, I think one of the reasons given as to why we should consider temporary permission here is that the national planning policy for traveller sites and its document, and the specifically part in paragraph 27 where it refers to a local planning authority not being able to demonstrate an up-to-date 5-year supply of deliverable sites, and that this should be considered a material consideration in any subsequent planning. However, there seems to be an exception where the proposed land is on designated greenbelt areas such as this. So I'm not sure if therefore that exempts that, and we shouldn't recognise this as a material consideration. Any clarification on that would be useful. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Griffin.
Okay, interesting.
Thank you, Chairman. Two questions about electricity supplier. A, is the site connected to the grid? And B, if it isn't, are any generators running? Thank you.
Councillor Steptoe.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to clarify a little bit more on with regards to plot lands. Yes, I understand the way plot lands came into being, and that plot lands were set up to help people get a footing on the housing ladder. At the time, the planning was perhaps a lot lax than it is now, and at the time, people just used to park a railway carriage or something like that on. Has the fact that it is now Greenbelt negated any of that, of the plot land, or is there any still relevance to plot land, as you mentioned that it was? I just can't quite understand where the status is.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Mill.
My question's really about permanent and movable structures. We've got two types of structure on this site, and it's not unknown in the past for a static caravan to have a skirt put around it and then concrete pumped in, and then someone claims later on that it's a permanent structure. Is that we're aware of that? Because when we go down the line and they're there for years and years, and if things don't go well in the future to do with temporary planning, and then it runs on, can this be a problem? In that we would find that they would claim that there's a permanent structure that they're living in there.
Okay.
Thank you, Chairman. Dealing with the last first, you're right in that people have looked for loopholes where they're just looking to establish a residential dwelling. They perhaps bring a temporary building on wheels onto a site and claim it benefits from sort of temporary rights, and then they've made it permanent over time. They put fixtures on the skirt you described. I think this is slightly different because what we're dealing with is an issue of a traveller site where by their very nature the mobile homes are static, and they may have ultimately a permanent base, but they don't need to prove a permanence to get round an enforcement trick. They're dealing with a different policy and a different issue, so they're not coming along and saying, oh, I've been established here for more than 4 years and fixed to the ground, and therefore I'm entitled to a certificate of lawfulness. So that does happen, but I don't think it's highly relevant in this case because the applicant is making the application that they are. Just on the plotlands point, members are right that Greenbelt, when it sort of washed over the district prior to the 70s, it brought within tighter controls. And yes, a lot of the dwellings that are there have been denied extensions and things like that under your Greenbelt policies. But I think an inspector particularly would be looking at the concept of openness, which is important to the Green Belt. I've explained it in the presentation in terms of there was nothing there on the site and it is inappropriate in that context, but then the inspectors on the two decisions have gone on to say, well, future site provision will be met from the Green Belt somewhere, so that nullifies that out. That's the issue, and in this location, sporadic developments scattered about are part of the makeup of the character. In terms of the children on the site, there is a hook in the policy about the best interests of the child, that if enforcement action is taken, planning permission refused, that action has consequences on the child's education once they're settled in schools. The ambition of government for a long time has to be provide travellers with a settled base so they access not only schooling but also medical services, etc. So if they haven't able to demonstrate somewhere else to move to, the need for a settled base weighs heavily, particularly in inspectors and our decision making. I think I've covered other than the electrical. Yeah, electrical. I can't help members with whether there is any electrical connections. As I say, typically travellers can provide their own generators, but they may also, as they've done in Watery Lane, particularly once established, make connections to the grid. But I can't help you with whether there are generators running on this site at the current time. I just don't know. There may be not. I don't know.
To come back, Councillor Hookway.
I don't know if there's any other members who've got any other questions, but I've got a proposal.
Before you do, I'll just say a couple of words. Oh, Councillor Weston then.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a question I wanted to ask. Understand building's already gone ahead on this site. If at this point, the end of this meeting, is refused, is the building still going to carry on while it goes to appeal, or are RDC going to carry on lodging what they were doing in the first place? That was just my question, please.
We can't predetermine what the actions of another person might be.
Chairman, I can help. There are stop notices in place, but I think they were timed around this decision-making event. So I presume, and I'm looking at my colleague, no, they've been issued. Sorry.
For how long?
Yes. Yeah, they were issued on the 13th of August against further engineering operations. But I would imagine whether there would be a need to reserve any of those in the future, I don't know. I'm being told not so. So there are stop notices in place that should, in theory, prevent the continuation of the work. Of course, if they do carry on, then they're in breach of the notices and could go to courts, or they may choose to lodge, obviously, the appeal against the refused application if that's what happens.
Okay.
Today. I'm still unclear on the status of the children. I apologise. So the two that we mention is one of them the son that is proposing to live in the caravan next door. In which case is he of school age? And the second one, can we confirm that they are indeed of school age? How old is this second child, or indeed the third?
Chairman, I don't have the ages, I'm afraid.
Okay. I think the debate has been quite full to this point, and I don't think there's a whole amount of new stuff that can be thrown in. From my point of view, I think when we've looked at previous sites, we've had the officer's interpretation and we've had members' interpretation of all the evidence, and on balance we've made a fair decision to refuse applications. However, those applications have gone to appeal, and they are very, very relevant to what we see in front of us. And in fact, one of them, it's just about 20 metres from the site here. And for all the interpretation that we do, and officers do, an independent planning inspector has essentially said that an application like this is acceptable with a 5-year position, with a 5-year personal addition. And that has had to frame the officer's professional opinion tonight. So I think, as I'm sensing Councillor Hookway is about to speak, I think you've got to be really clear with your reasoning about why and how our interpretation of the evidence, which we all seem to have a lot of empathy with, is going to be different and sustainable over that of the independent inspector. Councillor Hookway.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for your opinion.
Sorry, just before you speak, it's just come to us. Sorry, it takes slow. We've had to take ages out for data protection purposes of children. It is relevant and it is necessary legally for us to do that. Okay, Councillor Hookway.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for your views and your opinion. I would like to point out that the recent sites where it's gone to an inspector, the planning officer has stated that on both of those sites there was already development on those sites, and as I understand it, one was a pumping station and one had some other, was there another building or something on the previous site?
Councillor Hookway, I'm having trouble hearing you, sorry.
You know, it's just saying that the examples given about where the other sites have gone to inspectors, there was already some development on those sites in relation. One was a pumping station and another, I think, had a building or something on there, or some form of development on that site. It would seem that this particular site has had no previous development on it prior to the works that were carried out without permission and subject to enforcement notices. So therefore, I think that is a material consideration, because it's different from those other examples provided. We also had a recent example where consideration of another application was taken, and a different view was taken by the committee. So there is an example of the committee taking a contrary view to planning officer's opinion. So my proposal is for refusal, subject to inappropriate development in the green belt, and there has not been any proven exceptional circumstances in relation to this application.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Cannell seconds that. Members, we've had a good and full debate. We have a motion for refusal of this item put forward by Councillor Hookway, seconded by Councillor Cannell, on grounds of inappropriate development in the green belt and the lack of proof of an exceptional circumstance. Those members in favour of the rejection of this item, please indicate. Those against? That item is rejected. Thank you. If our visitors would like to stay for the rest of the meeting, you're quite welcome. If you want to go, please feel free. Our next item is going to be item 6, land to the east of the Rugby Club, Aviation Way, Rochford. Easiest way to have a go on appeal. We won't lose any costs on that. You knew which way that was going. No? No? Right, who's taking this one? Claire? 6. Okay. Councillor Stanley?
I saw someone with a phone that looked like they were holding it up.
I think, just to keep the flow of the meeting going, we'll come to that. We'll note it afterwards. We'll talk about it. Okay.
Yeah, in the pink shirt and red hair. I think. I don't know if he looked familiar, but I don't.
Yeah.
I don't know what relation. Well.
Yeah.
Very
Yeah. Anyway, go on.
Chairman, this is a reserved matters application for consideration of the infrastructure works in association with Phase 2 of the approved outline application at this site, granted permission in 2016. The blue line, which you can sort of see roughly along this edge here, that's part of the wider application site. The red internal line is what we're considering as part of this planning application. If we could have Plan 2, please. So this, the approved outline granting permission for a business park at the wider application site. An updated indicative master plan has been provided with the current application showing how the infrastructure proposed, so the infrastructure in roughly sort of this location, how it actually work alongside the wider business park development. So that's just showing an indicative example of how it could all look. It should be noted that the outline planning application is the overarching decision which looked at matters relating to construction management and 106 contributions, to name but a few. It is not for the application currently before us to revisit the matters already considered as part of this outline application, many of which are controlled by conditions imposed on the outline application. So this existing layout plan shows the current situation at the wider site. So a new roundabout has been constructed here within Cherry Orchard Way to the northwest of the application site, along with a roundabout within the actual business park itself, and a spine road linking through to this is the new location of the Westcliff Rugby Club, which is currently under construction. That was approved a reserved matters application earlier this year. If we could have the next plan, please. Great. The current reserved matters proposal includes a spine road which links round here like this in a loop. It would have a 3 metre wide shared footpath, cycle path and a verge which would surround the outer edge of the access road. No footpath is proposed to the inside of the looped access road to its southern extent. A new spur would also be formed from this road in this location. The proposal was also for green corridors, so these are green sways running north-south in this location and east-west, so a green ribbon and a green spine they're being referred to. They would cross in the centre of the site whereby a foot and cycle bridge would be located providing access over the existing ditch. We could have Plan 5 which shows a zoom in, so this is just a zoom in of that crossover going across the existing hedge and ditch area and how that would work with the landscaping that they're proposing. So the key material planning considerations are highway, public footpath, landscaping, surface water drainage and archaeology. With regards to highway, the proposed carriageway width would adhere to the Essex Design Guide, whilst the shared cycle pathway would now only occur on one side of the road. This is not considered objectionable. County Highways have not raised issue with such a proposal. These changes occur where the green ribbon dissects the site, and in such positions pedestrian crossings are proposed which would enable safe crossing to the shared cycle pathway on the outer edge of the remaining road. County Highways seek conditions relating to a gate control and visibility displays to the new spur which have been included within the recommendation. With regards to the public footpath, a public footpath will be proposed in two directions. The north-south footpath would link from the northern boundary of the wider site down to Aviation Way to the south, and the east-west footpath would link from a point close to the north-eastern corner of the wider site, where footpath 36 is located, down to Cherry Orchard Lane to the western boundary of the site. The proposed footpath links are considered acceptable. The landscaping proposed of green corridors are considered to comply with the principle of the landscape and design codes approved within the outline application. In order to accommodate the security requirements of IPECO, which is intended to be located in the eastern area here, the proposal now incorporates the green ribbon extending to the north-east to avoid dissecting the intended IPECO site. So originally, the proposal was for this to kind of come across and finish in this location here, but as part of the reserved matters application that's currently before us, it would now finish up to this corner here to allow IPECO to have a secure site in this location, which is a pending application that we've got before us at the moment that's been considered. Whilst this was not the intention at outline application stage, the new arrangement is not considered objectionable. The landscaping proposed is considered to provide a varied and acceptable mix in design. So this just shows an example where we've got a variety of sort of native species, ornamental mix, some hedging, some tree growth, and we've got some sort of benches as well and bin locations here too to provide a quite mix of landscape design. The Council's arboriculturalist raises no objection to the landscaping proposed. The County Conservation Officer raises concern with regard to screening and buffering to the northern boundary, and a planning condition has been suggested to address that concern. The surface water drainage for the scheme will be located partly within the soft landscaped green ribbon using 4 detention basins. So that's in 1, 2, 3, 4, those locations there. A planning condition attached to the approved outline requires details of drainage arrangements to be agreed separate to the current reserved matters application. With regards to archaeology, the county archaeologist suggests a planning condition be imposed, which is considered reasonable. This application is recommended for approval, subject to conditions. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, you will notice there's a slightly different layout on this one, where we have the recommendation at the front of the report. That's the way all reports will be presented from this point on. Do any members particularly... Yes, Councillor Steptoe. Oh, any of our visitors wish to speak first? No. Councillor Steptoe.
Thank you, Chairman. I have a number of questions, if officers want to write them down. With regards to the second new roundabout within the site, not the one on the Cherry Orchard Way, there's a spur road which travels north, as on the diagram there. Now, under the original application on the outline, that was a condition that has to be built because it then goes up to the boundary of the application site there. Can you clarify whether that condition has been met? With regards to the spur road running to the south to Aviation Way, can you clarify whether that will have access onto Aviation Way and whether that will be open to traffic? I seem to remember in the original outline application that where the green strip through the centre also included a cycle track. Is that still the case? Can you clarify that? With regards to you mentioned the public footpath along the green strip there and running north-south, are they to be adopted by Essex County Council? With regards to the drainage system, which is basically this is the attenuation of the ditches of the site, can you clarify where they will be discharging? To the north of the site, which is just off of this drawing here, you've got the River Roach. I'm intrigued to know how it's going to get there and how that's going to be treated, because being an industrial area, there's bound to be some contamination of that water. How that's going to be dealt with. They're the questions I have currently, Chairman.
Okay. Councillor Griffin.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Steptoe has covered one of my points. I just wanted to find out if the footpaths could be shared with pedestrians and cyclists. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Hookway.
Thank you, Chairman. Just wanted to ask the officer in relation to the green corridors. Do they follow a natural watercourse or some kind of ditch, existing ditch, or are these going to be completely created from scratch? And if there is a natural watercourse and the attenuation basins, would they be using that watercourse to drain into that that?
Okay, ready for those?
Just to come back then, Chairman, on those various questions. The new roundabout spur, it's not part of the current application that we're considering this section here. They've already built sort of up to this point. Actually, we have got an existing layout. It is number 3. So they've already constructed this part. So this is what they're showing as their existing layout. So this connection must already be in place on the site at the moment. If it was a condition, then hopefully it will be complied with. It's not for consideration as part of this current application. With regards to the access onto Aviation Way, sorry, can we go back to the other plan, which was 4, please? Yes, thank you. So this access will enable vehicular access onto Aviation Way. However, there is the intention for it to be gated control. So that's what County Highways have requested by condition, and you'll see that within the officer recommendation by condition that that would be limited, and limitation would be at the moment buses and potentially IPECO, who we know are quite big operators on the wider Aviation Way estate as well. It would be for, I suppose, County Highways as well to consider whether they thought anything else would be acceptable in terms of access onto Aviation Way. With regards to cycle tracks, so the footpaths running through, they are 3 metre wide, so they are shared cycle footpaths going north-south and east-west, so they'll be used by pedestrians and cyclists. With regards to adoption by County Council, if they are to that particular distance and sizing and they are made to the appropriate standard, then it would be expected that County Highways would be likely to adopt them. It would be for them to make that final decision as to it needs to meet certain targets and requirements which is theirs at County Highways. With regards to the attenuation, whilst they're showing it within this landscaping, it's not actually for consideration at this stage. We have a separate condition as part of the outline application, which deals with attenuation. So if we were seeing elements on here which actually didn't quite work out at a later stage, we would need to see a separate application potentially for soft landscaping on this site to address that attenuation. So although they are showing detention basins, I know we have dealt with some discharge condition to do with attenuation, surface water drainage as part of the rugby club and pitch site up here, and I believe they're connecting up this angle here at this point, but it's not for consideration as part of this application. It's something we're dealing with as part of an outline application discharge of condition when that request will be made to us, which we don't have at the moment. So yeah, the only other thing was with regards to sort of the natural flow. So we've got, there is actually a hedgerow which runs north-south in this direction. So what the applicant has done is they've used that as part of their soft landscaping to incorporate it into the design, so that they're not trying to remove a lot of existing features on the site. They're trying to include in existing features that are already present. Hopefully that's answered most of the questions.
Okay. You want to come back, Councillor Steptoe?
Thank you, Chairman. If I could just come back for a little bit of clarification. First of all, who will have control of the gate? Whose control will that be in? Secondly, is it can this committee condition that when the footpaths are built, they are built to the standard that Essex County Council may wish to or wish not to actually adopt? Is that something we can condition within the situation?
Councillor Hockway, do you want to just...
Yes, thank you. I don't think the officer quite got round to answering the question as to whether there was a natural watercourse or ditch running through the green areas or not.
So with regards to the actual gate control, details of that would be submitted to and agreed. So as part of that, we can agree who would be responsible for the actual upkeep of the gated control and who actually would be allowed to use it as part of that discharge or condition request. With regards to the natural watercourse, again, the same as the ditch, that's the hedgerow, that's the same sort of, they're using sort of existing watercourse and hedgerow features within the development. I think the other, there was one more question, wasn't there? Sorry.
Do you want to just...
Chairman, if I can come back. Yes, it was with regards to the cycle track being built to the standard.
Adoptable standards.
Yes, we would. We could condition. I believe that. So we haven't got a condition at the moment, have we, with regards to the cycle path? But I don't think it's objectionable to impose a condition requiring details of the cycle path to be agreed, and as part of that agreement we would then discuss with county what their requirements were. That it would have a separate adoption process which we wouldn't want to interfere with, but that condition could potentially enable details to be agreed and for us to work with highways to get that information together. So that's something possibly I think we could include.
Okay.
Yes, I'd be happy with that, but I'd like to see it as one of the written conditions within the application. If I could come back just to the gate issue, whilst I understand it's difficult to know who's going to do, and we can't really look at what might happen in the future, but I do have a concern that there may be, if we're not careful with the gated, with the control of the gate, whether we would impede any of the businesses on the existing estate, the Aviation Away estate, of expanding within that new estate. We don't want to put an obstacle in their way, because that would be a big disadvantage to some of those businesses. So is that something that we can make sure doesn't happen?
I think it's... Yeah.
I think the most we could do is, we've got the condition which will allow us to consider the detail of who will be able to be using that gate, and I think that's probably as far as we can go at the moment with regard to that gate control at the present time as part of this current application.
Yeah. Okay. This is, okay, members, we've got an application in front of us. Moving for recommendation, we've got on 6162 with the additional item with regard to the cycle path and the optimal standard. Yeah. So those members in favour, please indicate. Right. Thank you. That's unanimously carried. Thank you very much. So we're now going to move on to item 7, 72 Hockley Road, Rayleigh, Fitzwymark School. Again, there's information on the addendum. I'll just set this one up.
Chairman, this application site is an existing school, Fitzwymark in Rayleigh. Its boundary is outlined in red, as you can see here. It's surrounded by residential properties. It's got an main access off of Hockley Road, and it's also got an emergency access currently disused off of Helena Road here. A public footpath lies to the south in this location. The proposal was for the demolition of the 2 existing school buildings and construction of an extension to form a new reception and a new 3-storey building for teaching use and dining facilities. Temporary buildings will provide a reception during construction works to the existing playing pitches, multi-use games area, which is here, these are playing pitches, and temporary Helena Road access would also take place, and a degree of additional parking would be provided. There are 4 phases to the development. Plan 2, please.
Patiently.
So if we go to Plan 2 when it opens up, please. So phase 1 would include a temporary access formed off of Helena Road here, a contractor compound and parking area located in this area here. It would also have the new 3-storey building being constructed in this location, and groundwork to take place in this area around here within the actual pitch grounds. If we could have Plan 3, please. So phase 2 would include looking at temporary buildings around the actual reception area of the school, and they would then be closing off the actual main car park area. Can I have plan 4, please? Phase 3 would include demolition of the 2 existing buildings located here, with the construction of this extension highlighted yellow. Parking from Helena Road and a new car park here would be a temporary measure to enable parking for staff in this location whilst this car park area is closed to enable this extension to be constructed. And then after that, the final phase would include removing the actual... sorry, back to plan 4, please. The final phase would involve removing the temporary car park area, reopening this main car park here, reinstating the playing field where it had been used as a temporary car park, doing some landscaping and creating a gated access in this location here to limit the vehicles coming into this area. So this plan shows the extent of the existing buildings to be removed to form the way of the new extension. So we've got quite a vast amount of existing built form that they're looking to remove to make way for the new extension. If we could have plan 6. Please. So this shows, unfortunately it's a bit faint actually, this plan, but we've got an existing 3-storey building roughly in this location with some single-storey elements. So it's yeah. Yeah, sorry about that. It's very faint, unfortunately, this plan. I don't know if that'll make it any better. I might have a photo that can show it, but
we can see the
no. I don't think it'll make any difference. But if we move on to what's being proposed, then I can come back and show you the existing, because I've got a photograph that hopefully will show that later. So we can move on to the next plan, please. 7, please. So this is the amount of new built form we'll be expecting to see on the site. If we can see plan 8, it will then show the appearance of the proposed. So this is clearer. So we've got it's proposed single-storey elevation here with a ramped access up, going all along the side as well of the building. Various fenestration works coming along here. If we could have plan 9, please, we'll then move on to the appearance of the proposed 3-storey building. So here we've got, it'll be the same scale and sizing on the 3 floors, but they'll be used for different purposes. So at ground floor, we're looking at dining facilities, and then at first and ground floor levels, it'll be teaching facilities will be have at those levels. Plan 10, so this shows the actual elevations proposed of the 3-storey teaching block with the dining at ground floor. So we're looking at a flat roof building, and they're proposing white render and grey brick within their mix of design. So there are various material planning considerations that were relevant to this application. With regards to design, the general design and scale of the buildings proposed is considered acceptable within the context of the school site. The county urban design officers have raised issue with the proposed use of materials. They look to seek a predominant use of red brick rather than grey brick and render. The applicants queried whether use of grey brick in some areas of the development would be possible for cost reasoning. However, county urban design have still raised concern regarding this, considering that a lesser quality red brick in such positions should provide a possible cost solution. A condition has been suggested regarding the use of materials which can look at the material options. With regards to the playing fields, the proposed new building will be sited on part of one of the playing pitches at the site. The applicant seeks to revise the playing pitch positioning as a result to mitigate the impact. If we look at plan 11, please. Yeah. You might need to keep using it to find the one that you're looking for. No. So this is the proposed summer requirements would be met with a change in running track angles and pitch positionings. So we're not looking at a lesser provision, it's a repositioning and a re-angling of exactly what they're proposing in terms of pitch arrangement on the site. If we could look at plan 12, this would be their winter pitch arrangement proposal as well. Go across the other way, it might be hidden somewhere else. Yeah, press that one. So this just shows the winter pitch arrangement here. So we've got just again a mixture of different pitch positionings to accommodate the existing built form or the proposed built form in this location, and the regrading of some of the pitches around in this location as well. There is no loss in sporting provision. Sport England have raised a holding objection to the proposal initially. However, upon further discussion, they now no longer object, subject to conditions being imposed. These have been included on the addendum. With regard to highways, an increase in staff and pupil numbers that would result would not give rise to a significant increase in vehicle movements to and from the site. It is therefore not considered to have a severe impact on the highway. County Highways raised no objection to the proposal, including the temporary Helena Road access, subject to conditions. It is not considered with the measures proposed that the temporary access would generate any highway safety issues. 10 new parking bays would be provided in accordance with parking standards. New cycle spaces would be provided close to the new building. The submitted travel plan identifies ways to reduce reliance on the private car. However, plans to review this do not continue past September 2018. A condition requiring travel plan monitoring has been recommended within the officer report. With regards to surface water drainage, the proposal includes 2 attenuation tanks to hold surface water runoff before discharge at a restricted rate into the existing surface water drainage network. So the tanks proposed are in this location here and also under this new car park facility here. The lead local flood authority have raised a holding objection until some further information is provided. However, officers consider that a suitable surface water drainage scheme can be accommodated on the site based on the details provided, and have suggested a planning condition be imposed requiring more details to be agreed by way of discharge or condition. With regard to ecology, the survey supplied showed that 2 bat species were recorded, but these were foraging and commuting bats rather than roosting at the site. No mitigation is therefore proposed or considered necessary with regards to bats on the site. There are 2 preserved trees within the playing field. None of the main development works would interfere with the root protection areas of the trees. There are 2 surface water drains that would run through the root protection areas and 1 canopy that would need to be pruned. However, the working methods proposed to address this are considered acceptable. Around 10 columns of lighting, 4 metres in height, are proposed to the car parking areas and walkways, along with some wall-mounted luminaires to the new building. So the lighting proposed would be in this location here, and then around this new car parking facility here. Full details of lighting is suggested by planning condition. However, the principle of the proposal is considered acceptable. With regards to residential amenity, as residential properties surround the application site, there would be an impact. However, such impact is not considered to be significant, and refusal on the ground of residential amenity is not considered to be justified. It should be noted that an address was incorrectly recorded as 14 Louise Road on the officer report when actually it should have read 16. Just want to draw that to your attention. With regards to noise, the location of new school buildings will be similar to existing school buildings in respect of neighbouring properties to the site, and the proposed use of these buildings would not be considered likely to give rise to noise which would be detrimental to the level of amenity that ought to be reasonably expected by the occupants of neighbouring properties. Solar panels will be provided on the new building. The building needs to comply with BREEAM Very Good standard as a minimum to adhere to policy. A planning condition is suggested to this effect. Cadent Gas have also responded, advised that they have gas apparatus within the site. The applicant will be required to contact Cadent regarding this. The recommendation, Chairman, is one of approval subject conditions as outlined in the report and within the addendum.
Thank you. Mr. Davis is planning agent for the project.
Good evening, members. My name is Adam Davis from Strutton Parker, and I'm the planning agent for Kier Consultants, who are the applications for this proposal at the Fitzwymark School. Just by way of background, this scheme is an Education Skills Funding Agency funded scheme rather than a county council funded scheme. The Education Skills Funding Agency undertook an initial feasibility appraisal for the project and subsequently appointed Kier Construction as their design build contractor at the beginning of this year. The proposals, as you've heard from your officer's report, are for the modernisation of some existing substandard facilities, which will mean the erection of a new 3-storey teaching block with dining facilities, the remodelling of the entrance to provide a new entrance and reception, and the demolition of some existing substandard buildings. The Kier design team have worked on the initial concept plans which the Education Skills Funding Agency prepared, and one of the key changes we have introduced was to move the 3-storey block away from the properties close by in Millfield Close, which I think your officers have covered in the report. We were conscious that we didn't want the new 3-storey block to have any impact on neighbouring amenity through overlooking, overshadowing, etc. We've worked with the school to ensure that the scheme is fit for purpose, meets their requirements, and as part of the proposals, we've had extensive engagement. We've talked to your officers through the pre-application process. We've also engaged with the County Council's urban design team, highways, and the county as lead flood authority to develop the proposals. One of the issues your officer mentioned was a discussion about the colour of the materials. We're happy for the proposed condition within the officer's report and happy to work with urban design and your planning officers to agree a suitable brick colour. We've also had extensive engagement with Sport England. There is a small loss of physical loss of playing field, but we've come up with a realignment of pitches, and also the proposals include some drainage works to improve the playability of the realigned pitches, and also works to the existing multi-use games area, resurfacing works to make them more usable and more fit for purpose. And these mitigation measures, along with the conditions included in your report, have satisfied Sport England. In May, we held a public exhibition and invited all the local residents surrounding the development. And through that consultation exercise, there was general support for the proposals. One of the concerns was about construction disturbance, and some disturbance with any building project is inevitable. But Kier have submitted a detailed construction management plan, which will be subject to a condition. They have extensive experience on working on school projects, both new buildings and expanding existing schools in constrained urban areas. They're very used to working on this sort of site and delivering projects and causing minimum disturbance to local residents and also, importantly, to the school themselves. So the phasing programme that's set out in your officer's report has been designed very much to allow the buildings to be built, the school to move the children into the new block while work is carried on around the front of the building and existing buildings are removed. There's a logic to that phasing. I'd like to thank your officers for the comprehensive report that they've submitted before you and their presentation. They've been very helpful during the processing of the application, and I hope members you'll be able to support this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. Just in terms of the recommendation when we get there, it's printed on page 1 and going through, but in the addendum it's set out, the proposed changes are set out starting on page 6. Yeah, help yourself. They're on page 6 going through from 19 down to the bottom of page 7, 24, over to page 8 for 25. Then on page 9 it's amendments proposed to conditions 6, 7, 15 and 16. So it's a little bit untidy in the way it's presented. That's where the changes are. Right, Councillor Stanley, you indicated.
Thank you, Chairman. Two things really come to mind. I know there's going to be obviously a banksman for the construction traffic, but as that corner is very, very well used by traffic and also pedestrians, especially children and what have you, with the use of the car park proposed for the teachers to come in and out of there into using that car park, will there be some sort of a banksman or somebody to control that traffic, as there's a lot of parking in the street there? I would like that to be noted, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sperring then.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I say I find it totally unacceptable that I get 9 pages of correspondence yesterday evening in relation to this application. I've previously been to the council offices to discuss this whole application, and I get 9 pages of amendments effectively passed to me yesterday evening. I've had no opportunity to discuss it with planning officers, and I don't feel that I've been able to serve my residents satisfactorily. Moving on, I accept what our visitor has said, although neither of the ward councillors had any consultation involvement whatsoever earlier this year. Whether residents were, I have no idea, but certainly the ward councillors weren't involved, either at district council level or at town council level. So I'd register that as well, Chairman. Moving on, the more I've gone into this, the more concerns I have about the whole situation. Don't get me wrong, we understand the school has got to move on. We have no problems with that. What we have issues with, reading some of this report very quickly, where it's talking about mitigation of playing fields on a permanent temporary arrangement, talking about where it will be securing community use of the football pitches outside of school hours. I hope we're not going to go down the same road again we've been down recently in the last couple of years about floodlights and all this sort of issue. It's also talking about Sport England positively to Rochford District Council's evolving playing pitch strategy, which has identified deficiencies in youth football pitches. Sorry, who have you been talking to? We are closing pitches faster than we can keep them open at the moment. In the last 2 years, to the best of my knowledge, we've closed 10 pitches because there is no interest in playing youth football anymore. So that's bringing on another issue, but this is, I haven't had the opportunity to talk about this because it all came in yesterday evening. I don't know, I'm picking up on Councillor Stanley, I don't know how long this project is going to take. Years? I don't know. But we are now talking of whatever length of project on one of the fastest rat runs in the district. There is no alternative to move from Hockley to Eastwood, vice versa, out to the Eastwood Road, other than going up Helena Road. And I accept there is issues regarding using a banksman. I hope this banksman is going to be there at all times. I don't know how we're going to enforce that he is. I don't know how we're going to enforce parking restrictions because we can't do it at the moment outside schools. We have a zebra crossing on this very junction. To facilitate the access, we're taking away 1/3 of a safety barrier that has been there for, to the best of my knowledge, 25 years and probably longer. I fully endorse the comments made by the resident of 15 Louise Road with regard to the whole safety aspect of this issue. I don't see how this can be reasonably and safely managed without some serious enforcement. Very sorry about that. I accept that there is issues relating conditions from Anglian Water because of the potential flooding issues. Anybody that goes back to 2013 will know exactly what happened in Helena Road and all that sort of area at that time, and we don't seem to be having any idea of addressing that. We are highlighting that we don't have deliveries between 9 and 3. Sorry, I think that is totally unacceptable. Children are still arriving at 9 o'clock and they're also leaving at 3. That is far too tight. Can somebody please tell me what happens when all these subcontractors, and they will turn up at 8:30 in the morning, 3:20 in the afternoon, or 2:20, where are they all going to be situated? Because they will not all be able to get into the site. They'll be sitting outside waiting, adding to the rat run. I have concerns, you just mentioned just now, about the floodlighting. We've been down this road, as I say. I would like very much more to have information about the levels of lighting, what's involved, and generally I think we need to make sure that what we are potentially, as I say, we understand the school issue, but I think we've got to make very sure the implications that we are putting onto the potential issues around the residents living adjacent to this school are fully addressed. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Rowe.
Thank you, Chairman. I think Councillor Perrin's covered everything, actually. I welcome the upgrade to the school. It clearly needs it. It's in desperate need of modernisation. But I have serious concerns over the access, and I would like conditions in relation to delivery times, please. Not 9, not 3. It's far too tight. Certainly, we as ward councillors don't want to have to attend a child's funeral. Can we have some indication, please, as to how long this is going to take? Thank you.
Anticipated project length?
Just to come back on some of the information. So we have a construction management plan submitted as part of the application. That's provided details that they will look to use a banksman. They've got, like you said, the delivery restrictions 9 to 3. That's what they're proposing. With regards to timescales, they're looking to complete the 3-storey teaching block by September 2019 and then September 2020 for the actual reception areas. So that's the timescales they're looking for in terms of the development. With regards to actual lighting, just to sort of be clear, they're not proposing, and I know, and I did actually deal with the application where we had the pitch, which I know was very controversial within this central area here. The lighting they're proposing is just safety for the actual car parking and some of the walkway areas, so for obviously later in the evening. So it's just in that area and in this area here, with obviously some actually attached to the buildings as well. So it's not flood lighting for anything pitch-based or anything like that. That would have to be the subject of a completely separate planning application. I know mention had been made about delivery time conditions. It might be the case that we could perhaps expand on the construction management plan condition that we've put on to actually put some hour restrictions perhaps within that condition as well, perhaps expand on that if members felt that was necessary. We did actually go back, and I know concerns have been raised about the impact on Helena Road and Rees Road and the safety aspects. We went back to County Highways, having been alerted to that. And they still feel that they are happy, subject to the conditions which have been put within the report, that they are not concerned from a highway safety perspective about the temporary use of that access way for the time period of the construction works. So that's county views on that.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other of our visiting members you want to continue?
Back, please, Chairman. Thank you. I need confirmation that this will be enforced if there's any issues. I would also, and I'm sure my colleagues as ward councillors want to be kept up to date with any issues. We will be watching very closely, and we have one of our councillors living very close to the vicinity. But I certainly, and I know Councillor Sperrin, will be visiting frequently. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, on to members now then. Councillor Steptoe.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I totally agree with what Councillor Rowe and Councillor Sperrin are saying there in terms of the concerns. I did write down here that I had a concern about the mixture of kids and trucks. One of the things that they do in London, quite frequently, particularly inner London, where sites are quite restricted in their terms of access, is that the trades, let's call them tradesmen, have to be on site by a given time, otherwise they don't have access to the site. I would suggest that might be a way of actually doing that. Have a concern about, confirm me if I'm, correct me if I'm wrong, that you're saying no deliveries between 9 and 3, but outside of those hours you could have deliveries.
No, the other way around.
Ah, right, okay.
Yeah.
So the deliveries only between 9 and 3?
Yes.
Okay, right. I wasn't sure if I got that right way around. I would suggest that needs to be reduced. I would have suggested that needs to be between 10 and probably 2 is probably where I would suggest that needs to be. The other thing I do have a concern, like any school, pick a school anywhere in the country, and you've got a problem with car parking, kids being dropped off from school. There was mentioned that there is access, a footpath through to the, is it Helena Road at the back there, which children, no doubt, will use to gain access to the school. There is a scheme which is run by the South Essex Parking Partnership, on behalf of Essex County Council called CP3, which actually helps a great deal with parking issues around schools. Can I suggest that perhaps we encourage the school, or perhaps even some sort of condition, that the school adopt that, and that may help and ease some of the problems? Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. I think clearly there's going to be a lot of discussion about traffic management. We're not in a position here as a committee to determine what the traffic management plan is, but I think I would suggest as a condition that the final details of the submitted and agreed traffic management plan be agreed in consultation with the ward councillors.
Yes, at the moment we've got construction management plan condition which says to be in accordance with what they've submitted, but if you want more details to be sort of agreed differing to what we've currently been put before us, then I think we amend that condition to say construction management plan to be submitted to and agreed, so we can amend some elements
in consultation
of it
with the ward councillors.
Yeah.
Are members happy for that to go as an amendment to the proposal that we'll be talking about? Okay. Councillor Weston. Claire.
Yes, just a quick one on the Chairman on the traffic. Once this, I mean, I agree with everybody. Once the school has been completed and finished, my problem I have is like in most schools is there enough parking spaces for the teachers and whatever teachers are working at the school? But I've also got a very big concern of where mums and dads in the morning do drop off their children, as we said, because I go past it every morning and I get stuck on the roundabout. Bus can't get in the bus lane. Is there anything on this plan that the mums and dads can go into the school like a very kind of round thing and come out again like they do at Greenswood Lane? It's just a question, really.
So with regards to the first part of your question, the expansion would look to provide accommodation for an additional 150 students. Our parking standard requirement is an additional 1 parking space per 15, so they're providing, in accordance with our parking standards document, at 10 spaces that would be needed. We're not considering as part of this application, they haven't got drop-off facilities with actually in the ground at Fitzwymark School. They provided us with a travel plan, and we've put a condition on with regards to monitoring and wanting more detail around that travel plan, with regards to sort of making sure that the travel arrangements with students continues to be improved. With regard to Fitzwymark School, but they haven't got, and I think it'd be going perhaps too far as part of this application, requiring any particular drop-off facilities within the actual grounds of the school itself, and it's not something they currently encourage for safety reasons, I believe.
Councillor Hawkway.
Thank you, Chairman. I know what you stated about the access and the management plan. I just want to make a little comment in relation to what Councillor Steptoe proposed in restriction of the times and that. I think the only danger of that is if you make it too restrictive for the trades, what you might end up doing is making a 2-year build end up being a 3-year build, because you've got to be reasonable with accessibility. The thing that I was going to ask, because I'm just not completely clear with this. You've got temporary access from Helena Road. Is that purely a vehicle access point? With regard to students and school children, are they still accessing the school facilities in the same way as they do currently? Is there any indication that as part of the proposal in the various stages that changes at all?
The temporary access off of Helena Road would be purely vehicular. So there is a public footpath which runs alongside the bottom of that, which feeds down to the bottom of the sort of school edge and pops back round. It would not be expected that students use that temporary access, or there'd be any pedestrian use. It's purely for obviously construction vehicles while the actual 3-storey block's constructed, and then after that for the staff car parking while they do the reception areas.
Do any other members wish to contribute? Right, members, we have a series of recommendations with amendments on the addendum and with the details of the traffic management plan to be consulted on with ward councillors. Wish to say anything else before we vote? No? Okay. Those members in favour of the recommendation for approval, please indicate. Thank you. That is unanimously approved. Thank you very much for your time tonight. Close the meeting at 9:21ish. Thank you.